Alright, our knife is out of the second 400-degree draw, so it's finished in the heat treating part. We're just cleaning up. There's always some discoloration after heat treating, even if you foil wrap. But now we're working the knife, starting with 500 grit. And when we do this, the important thing is to keep this wet or dry paper wet, and it keeps it clean and cutting. So what I'm looking for up and down the blade are shadows. And the shadows are going to be slight dips, and they're always going to be a few. But you just work it at this grit until they disappear and you have none, and then you move up through your grits, finishing to about 2,000 on this knife. And then with the progressive grits to 600 to all the way to 2,000, it only takes a few strokes. And when we get to those finer grits, you won't see any back and forth like I'm doing now. What we'll do is start and one swipe, and that's going to leave a nice even matte finish on this blade. Then we'll get the guards peened into place, and then the handle on, that's going to be roughed down. And then when we start roughing the handle down and get it down flush, then we start concerning ourselves with this surface of the knife, which we really haven't paid a lot of attention to. But I want everything to finish at one time with that. The last thing we'll do to this knife is put the maker's mark on there. And this knife's getting 2 maker's marks. One is going to be my mark on this side, and then USS McDonough on this side. That was by special request from Brian, so I think it's going to be a nice touch to pay homage to the old Mac. She was a good ship. Just keep this flushed out with water and good old elbow grease. But sometimes you got to get off the machines and do some of this stuff by hand. There just is no substitute for a hand finish when you get to this stage of the build. The key is you don't want to see any tool or machine marks on your finished knife. That's just, that's not acceptable. I got another couple hours at this, and then we're going to start putting our handle and guards on. Okay, so it's coming together. I'm just about ready to attach the guard. I still have some hand sanding to do on this to take this up to its final grit. There were some stubborn stains and stuff from the heat treatment, but they're not as stubborn as I am. So got it out and got a nice even. This is 600. And we're going up to about 2,000, which is, that's the finish. I don't know if you can see the difference, but that's the finish that we have on the guard, is about a 2,000 grit finish. And then we're going to take the blade up to that same level of, I won't call it polish, it's sanding. But for this stainless, I think it's the best way to go. So anyway, now I'm ready to get this up to where it needs to be, and then we're going to attach the guards, and I'll show you that process. We'll make some new pins. Then we have to swage these holes just a little bit, and I just use this diamond, tapered diamond file. All you want to do is go in there and just spin it just a little bit in the top of the hole. You want the hole slightly conical shaped at the top, so that when you peen your pins in, it becomes a rivet and it really holds these together, and then nothing's ever going to take these off, you know, outside of a grinder. So, but yeah, just been doing some little bit of shaping to it, and I like the way it is turning out, and I'll tell you, that really comes to a fine, flexible point. I really like that. It's going to be a sensitive knife. It's going to be able to do some, you could use this for boning, I suppose. I have a boning knife in the kitchen that I like this shape better for, I think, for boning. I've been kind of playing with it and imagining, how it's going to be used, and yeah, you'll be able to get some good detailed work out of that. And yeah, it has plenty of nice flex and plenty of spring strength, and it'll hold a good edge. So yeah, I'm eager to get this one handled and finished out, and that's happening quickly now. So we'll keep you updated, and I'm enjoying this build. I'm just holding all three pieces together. I'm going to measure the thickness at 485 thousandths. I'm going to add an 1/8 inch to that, and I'm going to cut my new pins. So what I'm doing here is I'm flattening the top of the pin a little bit, and then I'm just putting a little bevel all the way around, a chamfer. The idea is when I strike this, I don't want the outside to mushroom immediately. I want to drive the pin into itself and make it swell. So we're going to do that to both sides on both pins. Okay, I've made some new pins, and I cut them just about an 1/8 longer than the knife is thick, and I'm leaving just about a 1/16 sticking out each side. Don't have to be real exact. So all we're going to do now is peen these in and fill that conical hole. And the idea is to lock these bolsters on, and when we sand off everything flush, with any luck, we're not going to see the pins. And then it's real simple from here. It's just a mechanical fastener. It's a strong one. So all you want to do is you want to bear on the end of the pin, not the knife, and you just want to strike one pin at a time until you start to mushroom that head a little bit. And whatever you're doing on this side with the hammer, the anvil is doing on the opposite side. You want to turn it over. And just about the time you think you're done peening, peen some more. Kind of rock your hammer and get that thing mushroomed over. Alright. That's about what you want the heads to look like. I'm going to go over to the grinder. I'm going to grind off this excess, and I'm going to show you what it looks like. Okay. So we got them ground off, and if you do this right, you fill those holes up real well, you don't see any pins when you're finished. And then this back here isn't going to get any more attention until we get the handles down flush with that, and then everything's going to be contoured and finished as one. But yeah, there we are. We'll do a final 2000 grit sanding of all of this and forward, as well as the edges after final assembly. But yeah, that is the way bolsters are supposed to be installed. And as I said, you can take these off by grinding down and pecking around and finding a pin and driving it out. But I don't want to do it. I've never taken bolsters off that I have put on, and I imagine it would be a pain in the butt. So anyway, yeah, she's turning out really nice. So we're going to get the micarta handles glued on here and get the thong hole in, and we'll show you that when we get to that process. I've started putting the handle material together, and what I've done is I have laminated a piece of the red fiber material onto my blanks. And what that's going to do, it's going to give this effect, like on this stag handle knife. Just a nice little bit of color. I think it's going to look good. So then, to fit the pieces, what I had to take into consideration was the taper of the tang. So this is no longer a 90-degree angle. So I had to determine what angle that was, and I just used some
angle blocks that I had. And starting with a 1, that wasn't quite it. When I put the 2 degree on there and pushed it up, I get a nice tight fit against the tang and the guard. So 2 degrees is my angle. So then what I did is I just took the belt off, and just using this flat porcelain platen, I just set my tool rest to that same degree and locked it. And then I take my squared pieces, I squared them up on the other belt grinder, and I just kissed it until I got a nice contact. And now when I put these on here, I get a nice tight fit, and then I put these marks on here just a reference so I don't get them swapped around when I'm getting ready to drill. But LS is logo side. So in the knife world, the logos always seem to go on this side of the knife. Point to the left, and your logo is there. So that is logo side. And then the other one, I just call it the off side of the knife, OS. So there's my orientation of the 2 handle pieces. So you can see the taper of the tang on that. And you can see it would make quite a big difference if you got these things reversed. You have to take the taper into account. And another area where I'm going to have to take that into account is when I drill the through holes. The only flat reference on this knife that remains is the flat just ahead of the guard. And I have a jig that will clamp on that and pull the knife back up to perpendicular to the spine of the knife. Then I can clamp everything up, and using these as drill guides, I can drill down through one piece of the handle material, flip everything over in the jig, put the other piece on, clamp it up, and then I can drill back through both pieces into the third piece, and I know my holes are lined up. That's important. And I will show you clips of that process as I go along, but I'm eager to get the handles on, and the knife just falls downhill from there. Everything finishes quickly once you get your handles glued up. So I will be back when I'm doing those. Alright, this is the jig I use for drilling my handles out. These jaws are 4140, and they have been heat treated, and they have been polished on the insides anyway. So I put the knife in there so it clamps right on that flat, and I really torque these down nice and tight, and it forces everything up straight. And then this is just a little adjustable jack I made, and it's domed on the surface. So if I just sit it in there, I just get contact. I don't want any flex, so that's nice and tight. And then this is a 3/32 bit, and all I do is I go from hole to hole, and I'll drill all of these. I'll drill the first one here. And that jack is important as I go down through, and you go down slowly, but it doesn't let anything flex out of the way, out of alignment. And I did that one with my arm right in the way, so I'm going to do another one. I'll reach up here. It's hard to get the camera angles right when you're shooting these videos. Yeah, you can see that. So just down slowly. Slowly back out, and I barely had room to get that one over my clamp. So I'm just going to move from hole to hole till I get them all drilled, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, I've got my holes drilled. I put a 1/4 inch bit and drilled for the thong hole, and then I put some locator pins because I have to take this clamp off, and I don't want this to move. So I put the locator pins in there, and that's going to keep the scale in place while I flip everything over. So now this one's going to go on. The whole sandwich is going to get clamped, and I'm turning everything over in the jig, and I'll drill from the other side and complete the holes. Okay, I've got everything ready. I'm going to epoxy the handle on. All the pins, my fingers, everything has been degreased with lacquer thinner. That's important. And this is some PC7 that I've mixed up, and I've thinned it with lacquer thinner. And that's the nice thing about this stuff. One, you can thin it, and two, you have a nice long working time with this epoxy. So everything has been wiped down. I've brightened up and put my scores on both sides of the tang. So now, just take a little bit of the PC7, and epoxy gets everywhere. There's no getting around it, so just be prepared for some mess. But what you want to do, it's a nice even layer on the tang. It's easier to put it on the tang than it is to butter it on this. I've even scored the underside of the guard right here. That's going to get epoxied on too. But you don't want to leave any bare places. You don't have to put this stuff on too thick. There's a lot of different epoxies on the market. I've always thought PC7 was the best. It certainly is the strongest. And this is one area where I would not want to use any kind of quick setting epoxy. I like time to work with this stuff. I can come back in an hour and still be able to work with this. So what I'm doing here is I'm just pushing the epoxy into the holes. Now I've taken each pin and I've taken that thong hole liner and I've rolled them in sandpaper to score, so they will hold epoxy as well. So I'm just going to push this through, and I'm turning it as I do, and if you notice, it's picking up some epoxy on the way through. Alright, so now I push the first pin partially through, and then locate my pinhole. And it's there, you just got to find it. There we are. Now I get my handle material brought down, push that pin through, get the second one started. Now everything else will line up on the way out. And I'm going to go ahead and get the thong hole rolled in some epoxy and push through. You don't want to go too far through the other side because you have to get your second scale on. So now every other pin can just be dabbled into the epoxy and push through. Just rotate the vise over, and I'm going to push it down flush. I want the same even coat of epoxy on this side. Just get all your pins pushed down to where they're flush. So you just want to do a nice even layer. Doesn't matter if your thong hole fills up with epoxy. We can just take a bit and run it through there and clean it out when it's all set. Again, you don't want to leave any bare areas. You want epoxy all the way to the edge. Now push up a couple of reference points. There's one. And let's get our pin started. And again, I want to push some epoxy through into the pinhole so the pin picks it up and kind of distributes it along its length as it goes through. A lot of it will come out globbed on the head of the pin, but a lot of it will get into the hole too. That's the purpose of thinning the epoxy. Now just find that pin. Go down slowly. I like to get my thong hole pin up. That locates everything else. I'm going to clean my hands and I'm going to push these pins all through. Alright, I degooed my hands just a little bit, so I'm going to turn it on its side and just make sure these pins come through. And I'm just stopping when I feel the pin come out the other side. There's a lot of excess here that's going to be ground off. There we go. Another wipe of lacquer thinner, and you can take some of the excess off it. That's all really going to be ground away. Alright, so the next step is I want to clamp it, but I don't want to clamp it too tight. I don't want to force all of my epoxy out. I just want to clamp it at each end, just till I see some epoxy ooze. I'm going to do this evenly. And try not to set your clamp on any, you don't want to epoxy the clamp to the handle. It's just one more thing to do when you go to take it apart. So we're cleaning it off. This is the handy thing about a little rotary vise. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to clamp and just tighten my clamps until I see some epoxy start oozing out. And this stuff is pretty heavy bodied. It doesn't just squish out like peanut butter. So I'm going to cover each end and make sure everything is down flush. There we go. Now as I'm doing that, I'm watching the epoxy ooze out, and I know I've got good contact. I'm going to do the center too. Make sure you're not on a pin. There we go, and I'm getting that ooze. This micarta will flex a little bit. That's it. When this is cured in about 24 hours, we can take a very rough 50 grit belt and get a lot of this excess out of the way. But until then, we don't do anything. Alright. Right now the knife is at its absolute ugliest. But you just wait. When this starts coming together, I think it's going to make a nice looking blade. So that's it. We're going to clean up and see you in about 24 hours when this is cured up.